welcome back to my channel. I'm Rachel, the owner and creator here at the Eclectic Cottage in Spokane, Washington. Today is Wednesday and I finally managed to finish the thrift flip that I was working on that I'd hoped to have ready for you guys for Saturday's video. It definitely took me a lot longer to put it all together than I was hoping, but in the end, I'm really happy with how it came out. I hope you guys like it as much as I do. And without further ado, let's get to today's project. As you can see by the amount of dust that is on this poor jewelry box, I have had this thing in my stash for, I don't know, probably at least a couple of years now. It's one of those pieces that I have debated in my head over what to do with it, and I finally decided it was time to get it done. So I am giving it a bath before I start with some Krud Kutter first, wiping that off, and then I'm going to rinse it with some clean water just to remove any Krud Kutter residue. Now, one thing I did decide right away as I was removing these drawers is that I didn't want to try and get a paintbrush into the little tiny cubbies where the drawers went. So instead of trying to paint the entire inside of this piece, I decided to go ahead and tape off about 1/4 inch just around each individual shelf where the drawers go. I needed to at least have some paint because the drawers sat back enough that you could see a little bit of the rim of each of the cubbies. So again, I'm just using some painter's tape, and this took me probably an hour to go over each individual little cubby and tape off the bottom and the sides. And once I finally had all of my little cubbies taped off, I went ahead and removed the doors, and then I took the hinges off the doors as well. And I also went ahead and removed the little knobs from the front of each of the drawers. When my prep work was all finished, it was finally time to start painting. And for this chest, I'm going with Crinoline by DIY. This is a very creamy off-white neutral color. It's one of my favorites. You guys see me use it quite often. And I wanted this chest to really not be defined by any particular season. I wanted it to be something really neutral that would go in just about any kind of decor. So that's one of the big reasons I chose Crinoline. Now I'm painting the front and the sides and the top, and of course all of the little drawer fronts. I also went ahead and painted the sides of the drawers on each drawer, and each different coat of paint, and there were about 3. I didn't have to hit every place with the 3rd coat, but each coat took me about an hour to complete because of all of the little bits and pieces on this jewelry box. Once I'd finally completed painting the entire jewelry box and all of the drawers and doors, It was time to do a little bit of sanding. Now, DIY paint is relatively thick and it can leave brushstroke marks. So I normally will take a little bit of 220 grit sandpaper and just sand my pieces smooth. I also take this opportunity if I'm doing distressing to do a little bit of that as well as I go. And in this case, I am doing some distressing. I wanted this jewelry box to have kind of a shabby chic vintage feel to it. So I am just sanding a little bit of extra off around the drawer fronts and around where the little knobs go and just on the corners, not doing it too terribly heavy, but trying to bring a little bit of that beautiful dark wood tone back out from underneath some of that white paint. Now, I'm sure there are some of you who are watching who don't necessarily like distressing, so you could absolutely just skip this step. Once I was finished sanding and I was happy with my distressing, I went ahead and took my jewelry box back inside and using a damp shop towel, wiped it down really, really well to get rid of all of that sanding dust. And while I was cleaning, I did just a touch more distressing with my damp shop towel, just in the corners and in a couple other little places. Next, it was time to remove my paint, and thankfully all of my lines were really, really sharp. I didn't have any bleed through or gooky spots where the paint had gotten underneath any of my tape, so I was happy for that. And then it was finally time to start decorating my jewelry box. I had decided to go ahead and use decoupage paper on my little drawer fronts. So I am using this brand new one by Redesign with Prima. This one is called Jardin Fleuri. And the first thing I'm going to do before I start is to remove the wrinkle in the middle using my steamer, just steaming it well enough to get rid of that crease. And then I'm going to move on to measuring my drawers so that I can cut out my strips of decoupage paper. Now, this ended up being quite the process, and if I'm being honest, I had to do it twice. I messed up my first piece of paper and ended up having to open a whole second pack just so that I could finish this project. I am having to measure strips for each of the drawers. I am also cutting off 1/4 of an inch in between the smaller drawers and also in between the top drawers and the bottom drawers to accommodate for the framework in the jewelry box itself. And I also had to keep track of which side of the paper I was using because these are reversible. And as I was doing the first one, I messed something up and had to start over. So this go around, I was very, very careful to make sure that I kept my paper right side up and that I kept each piece with its respective drawer. Once I finally had all of my little bits of paper cut to size, it was time to start applying them to the fronts of each of my drawers. And for this, I'm using Sweet Pickins top coat in matte. I am putting a nice even layer of that matte top coat on each drawer, laying my paper down, smoothing it out with my fingers, and then putting another coat of the top coat over top of the paper. I'm trying to be careful to not go over the edges or put any of the top coat inside the little divots where the knobs go. I didn't want my paper to accidentally get stuck in there. Once I was finished with all of the little drawers, I set them aside to dry while I moved on to the body of my jewelry box. I decided to go ahead and put a transfer on each side of it, And for the transfer, I chose this gorgeous new one called Gentle Symphony by Redesign with Prima. A lot of the peachy pink tones that are in this really go well with the decoupage paper that I used on the drawers. Now, it was a little too wide for the sides of my box, so I did cut a little bit of the greenery off, and then I used that to fill some of the gaps where the transfer itself felt a little bit sparse. And so I'm starting here by putting the leaves down where I want them to sit underneath the rest of the transfer. And then I'm going to place the bigger portion of the transfer over them. So I'm just peeling off that backer and laying my transfer down where I want it, smoothing it out with my hands, and then I'm going to use the transfer stick to rub that transfer down into my project while I peel back that piece of vellum, just making sure that as I go, all of my transfer is sticking to my piece. If I do inadvertently pick up a little bit of transfer, I just lay that vellum back down and re-rub that spot. Once I have my transfer completely applied, I go ahead and take a piece of that vellum and rub over the entire thing, making sure that I don't have any wrinkles or air bubbles, and just really burnishing that transfer down into my piece. Then again, it was on to the other side. Same basic concept here. I cut away a little bit of the greenery that was overhanging. I used that to fill in a couple of the gaps, and then I went over it with the larger piece of transfer and applied it in the same fashion as the last one. Now, Gentle Symphony is a midi size transfer, so that means it comes with 3 sheets that are each 8.5 by 11. And for this third sheet, I decided to go ahead and cut off these top little roses so that I could use them on the insides of my doors. So I just cut away the pieces, and then using the extra greenery parts that I had cut off and these roses, I arranged them so that they went up the outside of each of my doors. Now, before I started laying these down, I went ahead and took some time to arrange them so that I knew which pieces were going to be in the background and which ones were going to be in the foreground. You can absolutely layer these transfers, but you do want to make sure that your background pieces go down first, and then you put your foreground pieces on over top. Then, of course, burnish everything in just to make sure you don't have any of those nasty little air bubbles or wrinkles in your piece. Once I had finished with my transfers, I moved back to working on my drawers. Now, I did have a little bit of overhang of the paper in a couple places, so I used some 150 grit sandpaper to just sand those down. And then on each drawer, I went around very, very carefully with that sandpaper and sanded away the paper covering the little divot where the knobs go. So believe me, that was a fun little process, having to try to get each one of those sanded away. Then I went ahead and sanded the bottom and the backs of my drawers and just cleaned them up very, very well, and then slowly put my little jewelry box back together again. And this is where I ran into a little bit of an issue with this drawer. It did not want to go back in, and when I looked at it, it looked like the back of the drawer had come loose just a little bit. So I took some wood glue and kind of pressed that down into the crack, wiped away the excess with a damp shop towel, and then grabbed out one of my clamps and clamped it down really tight and set it aside to dry while I worked on the rest of the jewelry box. One thing that I had decided I really didn't like was the painted hardware on the fronts of the doors. Now, I did try to get these off and they were glued down tight. There was no way I could take them off without potentially ruining them. So I left them on and I thought I was going to be okay with painting them, but I just really didn't like it. So what I ended up doing is grabbing my DIY's golden ticket, which is this beautiful golden patina. And I am just very carefully going over the hardware with 2 coats of that golden ticket. And this turned them into a beautiful little accent on the front of the doors, which I really ended up liking. And so then I decided to go ahead and paint all of these little teeny tiny knobs with the golden ticket as well. And I also went ahead and painted the hinges too with a couple coats of golden tickets. Once my golden ticket was dry, it was time to reinstall my knobs. But before I could do that, I needed to clean up the holes that they went into because some of the paint had kind of gone in there and gummed things up a little bit. So I took one of my drill bits for my big drill and just used it to go around and around and clean up each individual hole, and then I knocked out any paint bits that fell back in there, and I used a little bit of wood glue on the tips of each of my knobs and then pushed them in. Once I had the knobs all installed again, it was finally time to seal my paint, you guys. I was so happy to be at this point after all of this time. So I am using DIY's clear wax here, and I am just brushing on a nice even coat with my soft bristle brush and then wiping back the excess with a dry shop towel. Now I'm also doing, of course, the front, the sides, the back, and the bottom of each one of these drawers, as well as around the rim where I had painted. And you'll notice I go over the decoupage paper with the wax. I feel like this really helps soften that paper up, and it also helps to lay any fibers down that might still be sticking up even after the decoupage medium is dry. Then it was back to doing the rest of the piece, just going over everything with a coat of that clear wax, and then being careful to wipe back the excess with my dry shop towel. Next, it was time to put my hinges back onto my doors and then put my doors back onto my jewelry box, you guys. It is coming together so nicely, and I'm really, really happy with it at this point. Now, since I did want this piece to have more of an aged vintage feel, I decided to go in with just a little bit of DIY's dark wax. Now, I'm not going to overwhelm this piece with an entire coat of the dark wax. I am simply going to go around some of the details and in some of the crevices and nooks and crannies and just add a touch of that dark wax to add a little bit more personality, a little bit more depth, a little bit of grunge, and just make this piece feel more aged, like it's been around for a long time. Once I was done doing my little low lights with the dark wax, this piece is finally finished, you guys. I had no idea when I started this project just how much time it would take me, but I am so happy with how it all came together, and in the end, I absolutely love it. I really hope you guys do too. That is it from here for today, you guys. What did you think of my jewelry box makeover? I hope you guys enjoyed it. I love how it came together. It was sure a process though. I'm not positive at this point how I'm going to price that. I just know that there's no way I could ever charge enough to completely recoup all of the time I ended up having to put into it, you guys. There's just no way. But I am glad that it's finally finished. So anyway, if you did enjoy today's video, please remember to give it a thumbs up. I so appreciate that. And if you haven't already, I would absolutely love it if you would subscribe to my channel and then just hit the little notification bell so you don't miss anything. And then of course, don't forget to drop a comment below and let me know what you thought of my projects for today. Just a quick reminder, the paint and products you see me use can be purchased through me at my website, and that's www.theeclecticcottagespokane.com. I carry DIY paint and products as well as Sweet Pickins milk paint and products, some Recycled Treasures decoupage papers, and of course Redesign with Prima. So go check those out there. I still have several of the beautiful new transfers that just came out, and I will be reordering some of the things that are out of stock currently very soon. Anyway, for let's see, Saturday's video, I am going to have a thrift haul for you guys. Yes, that's right. I actually got to go out on Sunday and do some thrifting. We hit a couple of estate sales. I picked up a few things, not a huge haul, but still enough, I think, to have a video for you guys. So I hope you'll join me back here on Saturday for that. Until then, I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your week and beginning of the weekend. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it, and I will see you back here on Saturday. Bye.